Tunisia, early 1943. For a veteran German panzer crewman, the trap was set. An American Sherman tank column rolling into a pre-sighted kill zone. The sharp crack of a hidden anti-tank gun, and the lead tank erupts in flame. The German crew braces for the expected response: blind panic, a chaotic retreat, or a suicidal charge into the guns. But the chaos never comes. Instead, something deeply unsettling happens. The remaining Shermans move with an unnatural, fluid precision. They split their force, executing a flawless pincer movement to flank the gun's position. It's like watching a pack of wolves coordinate a hunt without a sound. This wasn't the disorganized enemy they had shattered at Kasserine Pass just weeks before. Something had fundamentally changed. What allowed these novice American units to achieve a level of battlefield coordination that stunned the very pioneers of Blitzkrieg? The answer wasn't a more powerful gun or thicker armor. It was an invisible weapon, forged by a decision made years before the first shot was fired in North Africa. A radical commitment to battlefield communication that gave nearly every single tank a voice. So how did a choice made by peacetime planners give green American tankers the ability to outthink and outmaneuver the veteran Afrika Korps? To understand, we must first go back to the moment of their most humiliating defeat. February 1943. The Tunisian dust settled over the wreckage of the American Second Corps. The Battle of Kasserine Pass was over, and it had been a catastrophe. In their first major clash with the German army, American forces had been routed, losing over 180 tanks, 200 other vehicles, and suffering thousands of casualties. But the physical losses paled in comparison to the damage done to their confidence and reputation. In the postmortems conducted by Allied High Command, the verdict was brutal. British General Harold Alexander's private assessment was scathing. He considered the American troops soft, green, and badly led. Their primary tank, the M3 Lee, became a symbol of the problem. It was a machine born of desperation. A stopgap design with a powerful 75mm main gun, but one mounted in the hull, not the turret. This gave it a terribly restricted field of fire. To aim the gun, the entire tank had to turn, making it a clumsy, high-profile target against the low-slung, turreted German panzers. For American crews, it was a frustrating and often fatal design flaw. On the other side of the line stood the veterans of the Panzerwaffe Afrika. These weren't just soldiers. They were the masters of a new form of warfare. For years, they had perfected the art of the combined arms assault, a symphony of tanks, infantry, and artillery moving as one. Their commanders, disciples of Heinz Guderian, had pioneered the use of radio networks to orchestrate these lightning-fast attacks. Since the invasion of Poland in 1939, radio had been the central nervous system of the Panzerwaffe, allowing them to concentrate force, exploit breakthroughs, and react to threats with a speed that paralyzed their opponents. To these German veterans, radio-controlled maneuver was their signature. It was a skill honed in the crucible of battle, an advantage they had earned and guarded. The idea that the disorganized Americans they had just shattered, crews struggling with fundamentally flawed tanks and basic tactics, could ever challenge them in this domain was simply inconceivable. By every metric of modern warfare, the Germans were superior, and they had every reason to believe that the next battle, and the one after that, would be a repeat of Kasserine. But buried deep in pre-war American planning documents, in a decision driven by logistics and industrial theory rather than battlefield experience, was a policy that had nothing to do with North Africa. A single, expensive, and almost overlooked commitment that was about to turn the Germans' greatest strength into a shocking vulnerability. That commitment was the Signal Corps Radio 508. The SCR 508 was more than just a piece of equipment. It was a statement of doctrine. It was a powerful, crystal-controlled FM radio, allowing for clear, static-free communication on 10 preset channels. And the U.S. Army, in a move that was both logistically audacious and fantastically expensive, had decided to install one not just in command tanks, but in every single Sherman. This created something the world had never seen before. A tank company where every vehicle was a fully fledged node in a single resilient network. Any tank could talk to any other tank and to the company commander, all on the same channel. This stood in stark contrast to German practice. While a German platoon leader's Panzer IV might have an excellent long-range radio, the other tanks in his unit often had only a simple receiver, or nothing at all. They were trained to watch their commander for flag signals and follow his lead. The German system was a hierarchy. The American system was a web. If you cut the head off a German platoon by destroying its leader, the rest were often left deaf and directionless. But this raises a critical question. If this superior hardware was present in American tanks from the beginning, why was it so useless at Kasserine Pass? The technology was clearly not a silver bullet. A network is only as good as its operators, and having the potential for total communication is one thing. Using it effectively in the terror of combat is another entirely. The answer arrived on March 6, 1943, in the form of one man, General George S. Patton, Jr. Placed in command of the shattered Second Corps, Patton didn't begin with grand strategy. He began with discipline. To the exhausted, demoralized survivors of Kasserine, his arrival was a shock. He instituted a regime of spit and polish that seemed absurd in the middle of a war zone. He famously fined officers and enlisted men alike for uniform violations, improperly worn leggings, a missing helmet, no tie. But this was not about appearances. It was a calculated psychological campaign. Patton believed that an army that was sloppy in its dress would be sloppy in combat. And his obsession with detail extended directly to the tank crews. He forced his armored units into relentless, repetitive drills, day after day, under the harsh Tunisian sun. They practiced maneuvering and formation, responding to signals, and, above all, they practiced radio procedure. Patton's inspectors would appear unannounced during exercises, listening in on the radio traffic. Any breach of protocol, improper call signs, unnecessary chatter, slow responses, was met with harsh rebukes. For the tankers, it was grueling. But Patton was forging the human component of the network. He was turning a piece of hardware into a weapon, burning discipline into the mind of every commander until correct radio use was no longer a thought, but an instinct. What they were mastering was an architecture of conversation, a system fundamentally different from their enemies. Inside his Sherman, a platoon sergeant had an SCR 508 radio. On one channel, he could speak directly to the other 4 tanks in his platoon, a private, local conversation for immediate fire and maneuver. But with the flick of a switch, he could monitor the company net. This allowed him to hear the company commander's orders for the entire 17-tank formation, giving him crucial context for his own platoon's actions. The company commander, in turn, had his own radio with a similar dual function. He could broadcast orders to his entire company while simultaneously listening to the battalion command net, hearing the wider battle plan unfold from his own superior. This created overlapping, redundant layers of information. It meant a tank crew not only knew their own orders, but they also understood the intent of the units to their left and right, and the overall goal of the battalion. It was a design for shared consciousness. From the German perspective, the effects of this transformation began to appear in after-action reports as a series of baffling, lethal encounters. In one skirmish, a well-sighted German 88mm anti-tank gun ambushed an American reconnaissance patrol. The lead Sherman was knocked out instantly. The German gun crew prepared to pick off the rest as they scattered in panic. But there was no panic. Instead, less than 3 minutes later, a perfectly targeted American artillery barrage rained down directly on the 88's position, neutralizing the gun and its crew. German intelligence officers, reviewing the report, were perplexed. They had seen no forward observers. They chalked it up to a lucky guess or a pre-registered target. Then it happened again. A German panzer probe, testing a seemingly undefended flank, was met almost instantly by a squadron of M10 tank destroyers that seemed to materialize from nowhere, driving the panzers back with losses. The German reports grew more anxious. The Americans were reacting faster than they should have been able to. They were concentrating force with an unnatural speed. The pattern soon became too consistent to be luck. The alarm grew when German technical intelligence teams began examining captured or knocked out American tanks. What they found was deeply troubling. They confirmed that not just command tanks, but virtually every M4 Sherman, every M3 Lee, even the M10 tank destroyers, were equipped with the same powerful multi-channel SCR 508 radio. The implications were chilling. German doctrine relied on a strict hierarchy. If you destroyed the platoon commander's tank, you effectively blinded and deafened the rest of his unit, which would then have to rely on crude flag signals. But the Americans had built a decentralized, resilient system. Post-battle analyses from the 10th Panzer Division began to use new language, noting the enemy's highly flexible fire control and unnerving ability to rapidly shift forces. They were realizing they weren't fighting individual tanks, they were fighting a network. Knocking out one American commander was a temporary inconvenience, not a fatal blow. Another tank commander on the same net would simply take over, maintaining the unit's cohesion. The Germans, the pioneers of radio-led warfare, were suddenly facing an enemy that had taken their concept and amplified it to a level they had never imagined. They were fighting an opponent that could think collectively. It seemed the Americans had finally found their edge. They had the hardware, and thanks to Patton's brutal training regimen, they now had the discipline to use it. But in the heat of their first major offensive using this new doctrine, this powerful weapon would create a new and nearly fatal problem, one that came not from the enemy, but from within their own ranks. In the first major American offensive at Guettar, the radio networks nearly collapsed under their own weight. The problem wasn't a lack of communication, it was too much. After-action reports from March 1943 describe a storm of noise. The company net, designed for calm command, became a channel for raw fear. Crews shouted over each other, broadcasting redundant, panicked reports of enemy tanks. A platoon leader, trying to direct a flanking maneuver, would find his orders completely drowned out by a dozen other voices. The network, their supposed advantage, had become a liability, broadcasting chaos and paralysis directly into every tank. The solution was brutal and swift: the imposition of absolute radio discipline. This was the true turning point. New, ruthlessly enforced protocols were drilled into every crew. All communication was stripped to its bare essentials. Formal call signs only. Strict use of pro words like Wilco and out. A new, concise language of battle had to be mastered under fire. The advantage wasn't having a voice. It was learning when to stay silent. With the human element finally debugged through this painful process, the American armored network was ready, and the Germans, planning a decisive counterattack to reclaim the initiative, were about to give it the ultimate test. The ultimate test came at dawn, March 23, 1943. In the valley approaching Guettar, the veteran 10th Panzer Division rolled forward, confident they would smash the Americans once and for all. On a forward ridge, the crew of a lone M3 Stuart reconnaissance tank saw it first. A vast cloud of dust, the signature of an entire armored division on the move. The radio operator keyed his microphone. His voice was clipped, stripped of emotion, a pure product of Patton's relentless drills. "Contact! Mini tanks! Heading north! Grid X-ray 79er!" That single transmission did not climb a chain of command. It exploded across the network. In his Sherman, the battalion commander heard it. Miles away, the commander of the M10 tank destroyers heard it. In the rear, the Artillery Fire Direction Center heard it. All at the exact same moment. There was no panic, only orders. The battalion commander didn't send his tanks to meet the charge head-on. He used the company net to pull his Shermans back, forming the base of a wide, U-shaped kill zone. Simultaneously, the tank destroyer commander, acting on the same intelligence, ordered his M10s onto the high ground, creating the lethal sides of the U. The German columns drove deep into the valley, commanders expecting to find a disorganized enemy in retreat. Instead, they drove headlong into a multi-layered ambush that hadn't existed 10 minutes earlier. First, artillery shells screamed in. Then, the flanking M10s opened fire on the vulnerable side armor of the panzers. As the German tanks turned to face this new threat, they exposed their fronts to the waiting Shermans. The 10th Panzer's attack was systematically dismantled, not by a static line, but by a fluid, collective intelligence that reacted faster than their own decision-making cycle. The assault was shattered. The Americans had held, winning a stunning defensive victory. But what had this battle, won in the invisible web of radio waves, truly proven? We can now return to that veteran German Panzer crewman from our opening scene, watching in disbelief as the American tanks moved like a pack of wolves. What he saw was not a mystery. It was the tactical expression of a decentralized communications network coming fully online. The lesson learned in the Tunisian dust was not that one nation's soldiers were inherently braver, nor their commanders innately smarter. It was about the battlefield impact of a system. A system that combined American industrial scale, the radio in every tank, with the brutal, hard-won discipline to use it. The decentralized web had proven more resilient, adaptable, and faster reacting than the rigid, top-down hierarchy of the Panzerwaffe. This new philosophy of communication, forged in the ashes of Kasserine and perfected at Guettar, would become the invisible backbone of American armored power all the way to the heart of Germany. The German army came to North Africa as the undisputed masters of battlefield command. But they would leave facing an opponent that had discovered a more powerful principle. The future of warfare wasn't just about commanding the battle, it was about networking it.